from the community about ways that we're thinking about mixing things up in the last couple of years of the grant. And I'll tell you more about that as the broadcast continues. So to jump right in, we have a couple of stops on the roadmap today. The first is to provide updates and hopefully some closure on a number of topics that were raised at the June meeting. And then we also want to explore some topics a little bit more deeply to think about providing additional closure on areas that still have some loose ends. And so that was sort of the teaser part of the reminder email, a request that I sent out earlier this week. We are going to spend the last part of the webinar talking about what could be some bold changes to the way that EvalFest looks for the last couple years of the project. And we want to have time to get feedback from you, and then we're going to do some voting at the end of the hour today. And the purpose of all of that is really to have ammunition to use when we meet with our advisors in about 2 weeks. They will all be coming to Chapel Hill for our first in-person advisory board meeting that we've had for this project. And we're excited to have them here and to have the chance to think through what some of those loose ends actually still are and get advice from them on the best ways to move forward. So those are sort of the goals for today. I'm going to start with some shout outs, which we almost always do. So Taylor has tamed the beast yet again. The fall survey has launched. That launched at the end of last week. And so that piece is done. So a huge thank you to Taylor for putting in all the time to get the fall festivals what they want and need for this year. I also want to say thanks to the fall festivals for finding the time this summer to meet with Taylor and with me, and for continuing to work with Taylor as she tried to get all of the programming done for the fall season. The other shout out I wanted to give goes to Pat. I'm not sure if she's on the line yet today or not, but soon after the June meeting this year, we got a series of fantastic reports from Pat. And they provided feedback from all of you to us on lots of different topics and from several different perspectives. And those have proved invaluable, both to think through the things that we could provide closure on today as part of this webinar, but also in the planning that we've done for the advisory board so far and what that meeting's going to look like. So a huge thank you to Pat for all of her good work and getting it to us just when we needed it the most, I think. All right, here's one of the headlines from that work. And this is, I think, the sense that the leadership team had as well. So the leadership team met by phone a couple of days after the annual meeting this year. And we felt like there were several strengths from the annual meeting, but there were also just a lot of things that were left unsettled. And so there were parts of it that we felt pretty pleased about, and then parts where we just wanted more time, we wanted more closure than we had. And it turned out, lo and behold, that many of you felt the exact same way. So when we got Pat's report, we had similar feedback from all of you. And in some cases that was expected because the meeting was designed that way. In other ways, I think we've learned things to do that will be smarter and better moving forward. So thank you all for the feedback that you shared, and hopefully you're about to have some of those questions answered. One thing that people seemed to appreciate, but also wanted more time and thinking around, was the gallery walk. And this was one of those sort of planned ways that we expected to leave you all hanging. So from the beginning, we knew that we wanted to do the gallery walk, that you would get a catalog of all of the submissions, and Taylor got that out earlier in the year. You got a reminder about it in anticipation of this webinar. But we also wanted to help the community do some sense making around that. And so Taylor has gone back through to code some of the common themes that came through in those reports, and I'm going to turn things over to Taylor now to share some of those updates. And Taylor, if you are talking, you are still on mute.
I just figured it out. Hey, everybody. So before I jump in, I wanted to build on what Karen just mentioned. So we wanted these themes to help serve as a reminder that you do have access to the Gallery Walk catalog as a resource. And so we pulled together a few examples to highlight themes and to remind you about the examples that we now have to build on. So what are we reporting on? If we look across the catalog, almost all of the reports fall into one of two categories. The vast majority focus on demographics in one way or another, and then a couple focus on partnerships. So we'll jump right in with examples from the catalog. So this example focuses on demographics, but goes beyond that as well. More than half of the reports in the catalog utilize attendee survey data in their report. And so there are many examples to review if you are looking for examples of how people use data like your own. This example from Michigan State includes data from 12 different questions from their attendee survey, all on one page. Question topics include engagement, learning, and perception of STEM. So this report, like most in the catalog, was created for sponsors. So here's an example that focuses only on demographic data. Colorado Springs used both data from the attendee survey and outside data to provide a more in-depth takeaway explaining the demographic likeness of their festival attendees with the general population of Colorado. And this example shows another approach for using demographic data. Philly also focused on demographics, but they used their own historical data from prior evaluations as a comparison point to highlight a key area of growth over time. Comparison data topics include race ethnicity of attendees from 2011 versus 2016 and zip codes of attendees from 2015 versus 2016. Several festivals incorporated a zip code map in their report, and so there are several examples in the catalog from festivals who use this approach. This one is from Indiana, and they focused on zip code data at two levels, the first being all attendees, and the second were the locations that drew the largest crowds. If we think about how people are making their reports, most festivals continue to use Microsoft products, a combination of Excel, PowerPoint, and Word, to create their reports. So we wanted to show a few examples of those. This example from St. Pete was done using a Word template. And this is an example of something created in Excel by the Wisconsin team. This report is also one of the few examples that focused on partner data instead of attendee data, and so it might be useful to those of you who are looking for ways to present partner survey results. So some festivals didn't use Microsoft products, and so we wanted to share those examples as well in case you were thinking about investing in a new program or skill set to use for reporting. So Charleston used PictoChart to create this two-pager, and it contains both attendee and exhibitor data. San Diego created this report using Adobe Illustrator and InDesign, and a few others out there are using these programs as well. This is another example of a group that utilized outside data sources in a report. They used data on the increase in STEM jobs in the last decade, as well as statistical data on when students made the decision to study STEM. So for the sake of time, we're going to stop there for now, but in addition to the catalog and this webinar, which is being recorded, we will also plan to share the notes that I use to code the examples. They include specific details about some of the common themes, and they should help you use the catalog in the future. Look for those to come out with the next newsletter, and now I'll turn things back over to Karen.
All right, thank you, Taylor. Okay, so the gallery walk was one piece that we knew we wanted to provide a little bit more context about. The other is a series of training videos. So Pat's data from multiple evaluation sources last year have indicated that folks are finding the training videos that we already have and the Excel training for the few people who decided they wanted to attend that to be useful. We had always intended to take the Excel training and to create many training videos around that, and so it was nice to have data to confirm that choice. Based on the fact that we are expected to not only impact the EvalFest community, but also maybe use resources from this project to have some sort of impact on the wider world of informal learning, we've decided to shift the focus of these a little bit So we are not changing the training videos that you already have access to. Those all relate to data collection. What we have done is create a parallel set of videos that are not as festival specific. So if you are at an institution that does all kinds of programming and you use intercept surveys across the wide range of those and you want to adopt EvalFest methods for those contexts, there is now a slightly more generic version of those training videos that you could use. And we're hoping that other informal learning providers will maybe choose to do that too. So with that idea in mind, we have 3 different buckets that we're now going to create training videos around. The first will flesh out data collection. So we've got a ton of videos on intercept methods already. We've got 1 video on the engagement survey. We'll add videos as they become relevant and available about mystery shopping and other things that multiple festivals are using, so that we continue to build that particular series. The Excel training that we provided at the annual meeting really focused on data management and data analysis. And so we're going to create a series of videos in each of those 2 categories as well. Taylor has already created the first 3 for the data management series, and she shared those with you. They have to do with how to sort of password protect and create a clean and a working copy of a raw copy of your data, how to use filters, and then how to create pivot tables. So those are already available, and we'll continue adding other things related to data cleaning and coding, all within Excel, and that will be in the data management sort of bucket of video trainings. And then the analysis piece, we're hoping to have sort of little sub-series within the analysis bucket. And the reason for that is because we think it probably makes the most sense to have a conceptual video that talks about a particular analysis and what it does and when you should maybe think about using it. And then an Excel-based how-to for those of you who don't have access to more sophisticated statistical packages, and then an SPSS-based how-to. So our goal is to have the first of those series available by the end of October. It's going to focus on the chi-square analysis and build on some of the conversations that we had in June. And then we'll continue to add other analyses as we are able. And each one will have those 3 components to it. So the conceptual piece and then the 2 separate how-to videos. So the goal is to continue rolling those out for the rest of the life of this project as people need them. And so if you are noticing a need, if you're getting stuck somewhere in any of these 3 areas, data collection, data management, data analysis, just shoot us a quick email and we will try to think about whether that's probably a common problem and something that we should be creating some content for the community around. So those are the plans there. Then we've got a webinar schedule that was also developed based on needs and interests that were shared in the evaluation. And I'm hoping that you guys are going to be pretty stoked about these. I think some of these are going to be great. So in October, we are going to have a webinar that focuses on qualitative data collection and analysis. This is a webinar that Jen and I will lead together. It's going to feature some interview components from the evaluation that my team did of the National Math Festival last year. We had 2 interview components. We had a day of interview and then a follow-up interview that was conducted 2 months after the festival. And so you'll get to see those protocols, learn what worked, what didn't work about those data collection pieces. And then Jen is going to show how you can analyze those data in vivo. So we've had feedback from the community that says, enough with Excel already, let's look at some fancier stuff. And in vivo certainly falls into that category. If you're based out of an academic institution, you likely have access to a free license for in vivo. And so we'll show you some of how it works, but also be mindful that not everybody's going to have access to those resources, and talk about what it would look like if you didn't have the statistical package or the analysis package to back you up. Then in November, Taylor and I will be presenting a session on partner surveys. We already have partner surveys from several festivals from a couple of years ago. We will be asking for updated surveys so that we can code those to look for common themes, to look for unique but really interesting things that maybe only 1 or 2 festivals are doing, and we'll share those with the community, and then think about whether it makes sense to come up with something that lives in SurveyMonkey that we would all have access to, so that we have a common way to collect data from our partners. We do not host webinars in December. Instead, we ask you to share that time with us to contribute data for the research side of the project. We are not quite sure what that data collection will look like yet for this year. We're going to rely on feedback from our advisors to think about whether and how we need to mix up the research component of the grant. But we will ask you to spend some time in December at your own discretion to provide data for the project. Then in January, Teresa Burris from the St. Pete team has volunteered to give us a tour through 2 data visualization programs, Voyant and Tableau. So again, for those of you who are looking to break beyond Excel and use some different and more sophisticated reporting and data visualization techniques, Teresa's going to use some of the EvalFest data to walk us through some options there. And then in February, we will do our annual update on the analysis. So we'll look at all of the year 3 data that is common. We'll try to present some new data that nobody has seen before, but that many of us are asking, and then think about how the results are changing, if at all, across the 3 years of data that we have so far. All right, the rest of the schedule is unknown, and here is part of the reason why. So we know from talking with you guys and from the results that we have from Pat's work that we like to get together. We also know that when we get together, we would rather have something specific to do and have more of a workshop format than an open conversation kind of a format where we're chewing on big topics but not necessarily coming to resolution on those. And we know that we all loved Amanda. And so what we are proposing to do is send in a supplemental request to NSF to see if we can fund 1, if not 2, additional annual meetings. The one that we know we want to have will build on some of the common themes from IPSEC this year and common themes from just the EvalFest community, and it will be a reporting workshop. So what we are hoping to be able to offer is a 2-day reporting workshop in St. Pete that will be right after IPSEC. It will have Amanda or someone like Amanda leading us, and it will be product-based. And what I mean by that is that we think that those 2 days will be used most effectively if we work for those 2 days on actual products. And so we'll be thinking about exactly what that means, but ideally what will happen is that at the end of those 2 days, you will walk out of that training with either a finished product or a near finished product for a particular audience. It would be even better if we could somehow manage to come up with templates so that one group reported, one group worked on something that focused on sharing results out with the public, and another worked on a way to share out with partners, and another worked on a way to share out with stakeholders. Those kinds of details are not yet available, but we are expected to submit something to the National Science Foundation in October. We've been told that if we do that, they think they can process it and turn a decision around to us by the end of the calendar year. And so for now, we would love it if you could save the dates, June 6th and 7th, and plan to get to St. Pete. Hopefully for IPSEC, but if not for IPSEC, then for the EvalFest annual meeting, if we are able to hold one. If you can save the date in your calendar, then we hope to be able to confirm whether that's going to work out or not by the end of 2017. So fingers crossed. Mini grants. We have some updates here. This is one of the topics that we spent a fair bit of time talking about when we were all together earlier this summer. We have funded what I'm going to call 1.5 projects, and I'll explain that in a minute. Those involve a total of 8 different EvalFest partners, and so they are very community oriented in how they were designed. The outgroup survey that Wisconsin talked about during the June meeting was submitted as a mini grant and has been accepted, and they are already working. So they jumped right in with both feet, which is fantastic. We have also funded part of the motivation study that is a continuation of the first grant that Arizona had. And this is the half. And the reason that it's a half is because sometimes data don't come in the way that you want them to. So despite your best plans, you don't get as much data as you wanted or needed. And that was the situation that Arizona found themselves in earlier this summer. So they need a bit more time to wrap up their first mini grant. But they already had all of these partners who wanted to collect data for a larger study. And so we have agreed to co-lead that second piece so that Arizona can spend time wrapping up the first piece of work. We will co-lead the second piece of work by helping work with the partners and continuing to collect data, building on the momentum that the Arizona team started to build in June. And then all of those data will come together into what will hopefully be another mini grant that can be funded later. Related to that, our next mini grant deadline is November 10th. And just to make sure that everybody out there is paying attention, we want to do a quick poll. And so the leadership team is just interested in how people are thinking about mini grants. If you think you're going to submit one for the November 10th deadline, it would be great for us to know that and to be able to do a little bit of planning now. If you are on the line and you have multiple people on the line from your festival, we'd like one vote from each festival that's on the line for this question. And so I'm going to ask Taylor to go ahead and launch the poll for this question. If you are a director and your evaluator is also on, we're going to ask just the directors to vote for now. If you are the only person on the line from your festival, then please vote regardless of what role you play on the grant. And Taylor, I'll wait for you to know when it seems like all of the votes are probably in.
Perfect. And just a note that Tia did say she had to step away from her computer because there was a fire drill in the building. So we might be missing one.
Oh, geez. Okay. Fair enough. All right.
We're at 63%.
And that's of the 27 people on the line, right?
Right.
Yeah, I think that's probably good enough because we've got double attendees from several festivals. So why don't we go ahead and close it?
Perfect.
And I can't see the results on my end for whatever reason.
Oh, there we go.
I still can't see them. Can you just tell me what they say?
Yep.
For everybody in case nobody else can see them either.
11% said yes, definitely. 28% said maybe, and 61% said no.
All right. Good to know. Thank you, guys. All right. Moving along. We also have a cool new study that is going to launch this fall in the Bay Area. So this is an extension of some of the conversation that happened in June. The Bay Area is going to embark on a video observation study, and specifically what they're looking at is the quality of interaction that happens in expo spaces. They want to use that data to document the landscape and the quality of interactions that happen across the landscape for the field of science festivals. And then from a more, and that really feels like more of a research piece. For more of an evaluation side, the goal is to have additional video that can be used to further discussion about effective practice in the context of expos and what high quality interactions look like, what the common characteristics of those might be. And then also have video data and results that could be used to support coaching efforts, to support facilitators in different ways. And so they are working on both a protocol for how to get good video data so that we have good video quality, both visually and on the audio side. And then in the months ahead, we'll be thinking through how to code those data once they're available to answer some of these questions. And so that's a nice step forward from some of the landscape discussion that we had when we met in June. All right, here's another update, and I need to start this one with an apology. One thing that I intended to do earlier this summer and did not when I was talking about the American Academy report is to say thank you to Ben. So if it were not for Ben, EvalFest probably would not have been invited to be part of this effort. So the way that all this went down is that the American Academy folks called Ben to talk about festivals and data. And Ben graciously said, well, you know, if you want to talk about data, you need to talk to EvalFest. And so that's how they found out about us and our project. And that's how we got to be involved. So thank you to Ben for getting us invited into the room for this. Ben and I have both been working with the American Academy team over the last month to provide them with additional information to populate the festival spread that will be included in their report. That report is going to come out in summer of 2018. It's going to include an SFA map to show all of the festivals across the country and some of Ben's work, and then also the GRG results that show that the more kinds of interactions you have with a scientist, the sort of stepwise increase that you see and how people rate those experiences. Then from the EvalFest side, they're going to use a lot of our data, I think. So they're going to use our data to talk about who comes to festivals, and there we're talking about returning attendees versus new, and then the percent of attendees who come that are adults that don't come as part of a family group. We're going to use some of the motivation data, and those are based on the original Falk categories that many of us have used for several years, and not the new motivation study since that's still underway. And then the short-term outcomes discussion in the report is also going to feature EvalFest data. And so those are the core questions mostly, but also the items that look at whether festivals help raise awareness of other STEM resources in the area or raise awareness of the region or the state as being a place making advances in STEM. The other data that I think they may use are the correlation data we have, that the more fun somebody has, the more somebody learns at a festival, the more fun they say it was, the higher the overall rating, and then the relation between parent ratings and kid ratings as well. So there will be a lot of data in that report, potentially that come from EvalFest, and so we're excited about that. And we just wanted to make sure it stays on your radar. There should be something to share and hopefully something to brag about when it comes to the roles that you guys have all played in this project and the data that have resulted from it next summer, if not earlier. All right, so that's as far as I wanted to get with updates. And then I wanted to admit that there are still many big topics out in the world that are at loose ends. We have a lot to think about and a lot to talk about. And I will admit that sort of two things. One is I think the leadership team has talked about this stuff a fair bit, and we're still not sure exactly where to land, although I think we're getting closer to some ideas. And that's what we wanted to use the rest of the time to talk to you all about today. The other thing is that we really want to rely on the advisors to help guide the work forward. So if we think about some of the big topics that I haven't talked about yet today, the landscape study piece is still out there. That has, in other conversations that we've had since the annual meeting, sort of broken down into two different categories. There's a fair bit of interest among the community in describing the landscape of festivals in the United States, and maybe using some of our affinity groups as natural divisions and how we think about saying what different festival models are in the States. Our guess is that the outcomes look equally good across all of those festival models, but we don't know. But that might be kind of a cool story to tell. And so in getting ready for the fall festivals, a number of people mentioned interest in those areas. So that's a possibility. Describing the landscape of an expo, the Bay Area work is going to take a huge leap forward, take us all a huge leap forward, I think, in this direction. And so we do have some movement there, but that's still a large piece to tackle. And so that's still a little bit of a loose end, I think. The energy of a festival and whether and how we could think about measuring that, that's still an open question. And then there's the I word, there's impact. And what does that even mean? And I think, with 24 festivals, we have at least 24 different ways of defining that. But we need to maybe think about spending some time to narrow down on that and making some decisions. And then also deciding if we care about impact at only the attendee level, or if we also care about measuring impact on scientists and presenters who are involved in our festival. So with all of that in mind, I'm going to shift gears. And I will admit the next few slides are, I think, going to feel a little disjointed as we go, but I'm hoping to bring it back to a logical place. So bear with me. All right. This is something that you cannot possibly understand in the seconds that you've had to look at it. but I wanted to mention it because it's from a packet of resources that I just learned about that I thought maybe some of you would want to know about. I'm going to come back to this in a minute, but I wanted to show some other examples. So these are templates. They're built in PowerPoint. They are all editable, and they're from a group called The Grove. The Grove does a number of things. One of the things they do is train people to be graphic recorders. And so those are the people who create huge posters like this while a meeting is going on. The Grove has taken the kinds of things that people use the most often and created these templates in PowerPoint that you can edit. And so if you like the idea of going to a more graphic place with your work, you can buy 20 of these templates for, I think it was about $400. And so I wanted to just show these to you guys and let you know that they're out there before I dive into the EvalFest one. So this is for an agenda for a meeting. And you can see how you might plug in different pieces. They have 3 or 4 of these. These are where I think they really start to have some staying power. They have a lot that focus on strategic planning. And so if you like to think about strategic planning and do a lot of that work, then these might be something you want to check out. You can see all 20 templates on their website. This is one that we might use with our advisors in a couple of weeks. It's a context map. And so the current thinking for how we might use this is to basically get rid of all the clutter and to ask advisors to take notes on this map throughout the entire 2-day meeting, and then to come together in a joint session on the second day to use everybody's ideas to create a context map for the world of informal learning. And so you could think about different people having different expertise and filling in different trends. You could also think about the fact that maybe we don't have a lot of political factors, and maybe we don't have a lot of economic climate factors that we have to deal with. The nice thing about these templates is that you can edit all of these fields. And so if we decide that these don't really make sense for us, we could change those out and print this and give it to people to have as a way to take notes throughout the meeting. All right, back to this. And I'm just noticing that Becky has a question. Taylor, it looks like it's on the questions page.
Yep, she wanted to know if it would be possible to provide the website for the templates.
Yes, ma'am. I will do that. Although now I've done, okay, there. All right, so this is a stripped down version of the EvalFest piece that I showed earlier. And I'm gonna walk you through how this was useful to me and trying to think about what to say today. So it builds on the values that are at the bottom. And so the values that we, I think, talk about the most and try to honor the most in how we do the work for this community of practice is that we value the community itself, and we value data, and maybe even more than that, we value the intersection between those different things. So how do we provide data for the community? How do we help the community to use those data to make decisions about more data that we need to make different decisions and move the conversation forward? All of that is in service of this vision that we as a group have sort of evolved into over the last 3 years. So this is not really what EvalFest was designed to do originally, but I think it's where we all have ended up. And you guys have heard us talk about this before, so it's not news. But we think that the vision for this project is to establish a literature that legitimizes festivals. And there are lots of different ways that you could think about doing that. And what you see as the sort of beams of light around this vision are different stories you could tell, in my opinion at least, to establish a literature and to legitimize something as an informal learning mechanism. So you could think about, first of all, defining what the thing is. So what are festivals? Who shows up to those? Why do they come? What do they do when they're there? What do they get out of it in the short term? And then what are the longer term impacts? And so if we think about the conversations we've had about attendees over the last several years, almost everything we've done is related to one of these buckets or another. And so if we think about the 2 years we've got left, this to me was a helpful way to think about, okay, what are we doing? And are we positioned in a place that we want to be successful in relation to this vision? So I think where I'm going to go with this is that in some ways the answer is yes, and in some ways the answer is no. And it's the no that we need to think about for the last 2 years, and how to use the time that we've got left wisely. So the supports that I'm going to focus on for the purposes of this conversation are the data sources that we have. Some of these are already in the bag, some of them are ongoing. So the attendee survey, we will have, safe to say, more than 30,000 responses by the end of this calendar year from attendees. The timing and tracking study that St. Pete did is done. The motivation study, outgroup study, video study, and the truth booth are all ongoing and sort of underway. And so we've got a lot of supports, a lot of data supports coming in. And then the question is, how do they line up with these different possible stories that result in this overall vision? So I went through and created sort of a cheat sheet of how I think all of this stuff lines up, but also the few studies that are already in the literature. Part of the reason that this is our vision statement is that we don't have a literature to build on, or as much of one as we would want. And so if we think about what festivals are and whether there's literature to focus on that, there are 2 studies that are already out there. EvalFest can't take credit for either one. So one is the Multitude study that came out in 2010. It is based on European festivals, maybe entirely British festivals. And then we have Ben's article from 2014 that talks about when science makes us who we are. Both of those define what festivals are in different ways. You're going to start to see some color coding come up at this point. Anything that's in gray is something that EvalFest is not responsible for and couldn't take credit for. Anything in orange is a contribution that we can potentially make to the literature. So when we think about who attends and what we know about who attends, the Rose et al. Study is the Wisconsin Science Festival study that came out this year. That compares festival attendees to attendees who attended a panel that wasn't related to the festival. So that's out there and in the world and something we can build off of. The PI team is in the process of creating a manuscript that will focus on who attends that uses attendee survey data. And then both the outgroup study that just started and the truth booth study that needs to be finished will both also have data that talk about who attends from different perspectives, or who doesn't, in the case of the outgroup study. So we have a fair bit of work to potentially contribute to the who attends question. Why do people come? Jensen and Buckley is one of the studies that we all reviewed together as a community a couple of years ago for one of the webinars. It focuses specifically on motivation. The American Academy report will include some motivation data that are the earlier version of how EvalFest measured motivation, and then we will have the motivation study from Arizona that will be a more sophisticated and festival-specific approach to measuring motivation once the whole package of that study wraps up. What happens when they get there? Peterman and Young is the mystery shopper article that talks about best practices in logistics and in scientist interactions at festival booths, at expos. Then we have Van Vinen, which is in prep. This is Kaya's article that will come out of the St. Pete timing and tracking study that was completed last year. The video study that the Bay Area team is going to launch in November will also contribute in this area, again, focusing on interactions. Kaya's work is a little bit different. You guys will remember that focuses on sort of family engagement at an expo booth. And so sort of 3 different approaches toward what happens when people get there. We've got the most to say about what people get out of a festival when they come in the short term. So Jensen and Buckley talk about that a little bit. Rose et al. Talks about that a little bit. Illingworth et al. Is the second article that we read and reviewed in the webinar that I mentioned already from a couple of years ago. They specifically focus on science careers. The Arkansas Science Festival published an article after their inaugural festival a couple of years ago, and they report some outcomes from that initial festival. And then the PI team is working on a piece that will build on a lot of the literature you already see in this category to talk about what EvalFest has to say about what people get out of festivals in the short term. Now, there's a big empty bucket on this slide. I don't have anything else to animate when it comes to the longer term impacts because we don't know. This is not a problem that's specific to festivals. You guys all know that. This is a problem that a lot of education, and particularly informal education, grapples with. And so it's something that we'll have to think about as a community. What I do think we should say out loud is that if this is truly our vision, if I have populated these circles correctly in the limited slice of what I've done, we're doing what we want and what we need, right? So we are going to have contributions to a lot of these different categories. There are a couple of categories, though, the what are festivals and the longer term impacts, where we still don't have anything to say. But maybe we could, and maybe we should. And that's part of what leads us to these bold steps. So if we think about the challenges in where we've been and the fact that we've got a couple years left and where we want to get, we have a mismatch between the supports, the data that we have coming into the system that is EvalFest, and the gaps in the vision that we currently have. Another challenge is that we're running out of time. We only have 2 years left. And probably the biggest challenge of all is, what in the world is impact? How do we define that? How do we think about measuring it? How do we think about measuring it in the time that we've got left? And so that's what the leadership team has been struggling with this summer. How to think about all of the ideas that we have, all of what we want to accomplish, and how to try to get it done in the 2 years that remain. So we have come up with some bold steps that will change, in some ways, the way that EvalFest looks and is led for the next 2 years. I'm going to go through all of the steps at once, and then the rest of the time today is going to be spent providing some time for you guys to ask clarifying questions and then to vote on whether you think that step is in the right direction or if we have lost our minds. And then based on how you guys react to that, we will take the community interest to the advisory board and work with the advisory board to flesh those ideas out in a couple weeks' time, and then bring back some more specific ideas for next steps and tying up the remaining loose ends. All right. Whoops, wrong way. Here's the first one. We think that maybe we should consider shifting the leadership team's effort away from the attendee survey. And don't panic is what I want to say now. Don't panic. Here's what I mean by that. We know from talking to all of you that the attendee survey is important, that it is a critical part of how you evaluate your work every year and how you share what you're up to. So we don't think it makes sense for the attendee survey to go away. What is true of of the results that we have so far, and the American Academy report and the work that we've done to get ready to start publishing has helped with this. We are not going to learn anything new as a community from 50,000 responses that we don't already know from 30,000 responses. What is also true is that over time, you guys have made fewer and fewer changes to your annual surveys, to your surveys every year. And so if we take this bold step, what that would mean is that we don't make any more changes in QuickTap. We stick with the 2017 survey. People use it in 2018, they use it in 2019. You would receive all of the same support around the training and getting the iPads and all of that, but we wouldn't suck as much time into the calendar editing that every year. This is one of the biggest pieces of work that we do. And so to shift away from this would free up a fair bit of time that could be used elsewhere. And we're wondering if it makes sense to do that. Here are some ideas for what that might look like. We think it probably makes sense, if people are interested in doing this, to have the EvalFest team help co-lead the mini grants, particularly those that have a small community of people working together. When things have started to get a little tricky with the mini grants that have already been funded, it usually comes down to the fact that there's a lot of management that has to happen if you're not the only festival out there collecting a certain kind of data. If you got to coordinate and organize 5 festivals or more to get everybody on the same page and collecting data, that takes a fair bit of work. And we think it probably makes sense for the mini grants to be able to lean on the EvalFest leadership team to make that happen and to take some of the burden off. So that's another idea. Oops. The third one is to have the EvalFest leadership team launch some new studies. And I'll share some ideas related to that in a minute. The fourth idea is to allow all of you to apply for mini grant funding to publish. We have more data than we will probably ever be able to publish if we rely on the leadership team alone. And so maybe it makes sense to allow those of you who are interested in publishing with the opportunity to do that, and then to have the leadership team support those efforts and help you build capacity in that way if you don't already have it. We also suspect, because you are creative and fantastic people, that you have other bold steps that you might want to see us take. And so we are open to those ideas as well. So moving along, this is our first idea. What we want to do at this point is open things up for questioning for each of these and then do a quick vote. The votes are designed to, the voting options you'll have are designed to be polarizing. We really want to leave this meeting with some marching orders from you guys about what you want to see and what you think we should not be thinking about anymore. So you can raise your hand if you have a question about this attendee survey piece. You can type a note in the chat. Taylor and I are going to monitor those. And then when we've answered the clarifying questions that are out there, we will open it up to a vote. If you asked a question earlier, let's see. Oh, okay, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong thing. So raise your hand if you would like to ask your question out loud or type your question in the chat. Taylor's monitoring those. So again, this is the idea that we would lock in the survey from 2017, and that would be the survey option you had for the last 2 years. You don't have to use the attendee survey for the last 2 years. You could do something else. Okay. Taylor, do you have anything on your end?
Jordan just had a comment that said this makes sense.
Jordan is voting out loud into the group. All right, well, let's see what everybody else thinks. Let's open the poll for this one. And you will see, as I said, you know, you've sort of got the idea to say, I love this, let's do it, I can live with this, or what were you thinking? That's not exactly how they read, but it's sort of what they mean. So if everybody could vote quickly on whether you think this is something we should consider moving forward with. And Taylor, I'll wait for an update from you when it seems like most of the votes are in.
Perfect. All right, we're at 78%. So we've got, well, no, 81%. All right, 59% say we need it, let's do it. 41% say I can live with it. And 0% say it's a mistake, please don't.
Oh, okay. Yay. Thank you guys for that. All right, moving along. The EvalFest team can help co-lead mini grants if people are interested in this.
Karen, sorry, just one clarifying question. Is this, are they voting per festival, one vote for per festival, or are these everyone?
Yeah, this can be everybody. I'm sorry, I should have said that earlier. Yeah, these can be everybody. All right, any clarifying questions about what this really means or what we think it might really mean before we open this one for a vote? And again, I'll scroll to look for hands that are raised, and Taylor will monitor the chat. All right. I don't have anything on my end.
We've got a couple questions.
Oh, awesome.
Roshni says, at what point would the team come into the mini grant process as co-lead, before it is submitted or after submission?
Well, we'd have to sort that out because we already have some funded. So I think the important thing about the co-lead piece is that we don't want to get in the way of the ideas. I think we all agree that it's important for the community to initiate those ideas and to go through the process of seeing those come to fruition. The co-leading, I think, would probably center on two things. One would be making sure that the approach that's taken will result in data that can be applied to the entire community and just not the festival or festivals that are participating. And then the second would be helping with the management stuff, all of the burden that comes along with that honestly, I think we've all underappreciated and undervalued in the budgets that we've seen so far. And so it would be those two areas, but trying to strike a balance in a way that it's not, that we're coming nowhere close to commandeering work that you guys want as your own. And so if people like this idea and we move forward with it, I think we probably would come up with a standard practice for when you start talking to the leadership team about it. But we didn't want to make too much progress on any of these ideas in case you guys hate them. And so that would be something that we would have to sort out if we move forward with this piece.
And then we have a second question from Paula Frank. Good idea, but how much of your time will it take? Could you be using your time better in other areas?
Maybe. I don't know. We're sort of building the plane as we fly it at this point with all of these ideas. And so it's a fair question. I don't think I have a good answer, though. All right, let's vote on this one. And so again, everybody can vote. Please do. Please go quickly, because we only have a few minutes left.
Okay, we've got 85% voted. 22% say we need it, let's do it. 74% say I can live with it. And 4% say it's a mistake, please don't.
Nice. Okay, good. I like the variability so far. Okay, next up. The EvalFest team leads new evaluation studies. And I put a few examples of what those might be on here. Some of these are things you've already heard of. Others come from comments that you guys have made in your annual interview with me and Taylor as we get ready for your survey. And so, you know, the questions at the end of that interview really focus on where you want to see us heading in the future. And there are some different answers there than what we talked about at the annual meeting. And so there are some possibilities here. These are not meant to guide conversation at this point. It's just sort of a scattershot of ideas that at least more than one festival is interested in. So clarifying questions here. I will say, while we're waiting to see if any of those come in, I think the idea here is that this would be a common study. And so if you're a festival who feels like you're probably done with the attendee survey, you don't want to have to use it again, but you do want to collect some new data, this would be an opportunity to do that. And to do that in a way that maybe contributes to some of the gaps in what we know about festivals overall.
So we've got a question from Karen Yanowitz. When you say lead new evaluation studies, does that mean that the EF team works themselves based on what they have learned, or is it to gather people who want to work together?
I don't know. I think it could be either way. I think for it to be truly community created, people would want and need to be on the ground pretty early on. I think the trick of the balance of all of that is that none of us want to have to relive the first annual meeting where we all spent a day deciding what to measure on the attendee survey. So somewhere between those two is my guess. I think probably the difference between what this piece would be and the mini grants is that if you really want to take on a leadership role, we would love to see you do that. And I'm talking to you, Karen, and you, everybody else on the line. That's a mini grant application. This would be something that the EvalFest team invested more time in crafting initially, and then brought to the community as an opportunity. And hopefully at a point that there was still some ability for the community to massage the specifics of what that study was. And then it would be another common way to collect data from across festivals.
And I'm not sure, I think you just answered this, Karen, but Roshni said, are some mini grants for new evaluation studies? If there are, how would this differ from being co-lead of mini grants?
Yep, so the new evaluation studies would be initiated by and led by the leadership team. So it would be like the attendee survey, but on a completely different topic and with a completely different method. All right, let's open this one up for a vote.
All right, we've got 85% voted. 50% said we need it, let's do it. 45% said I can live with it. And 5% said it's a mistake, please don't.
All right. Last one. Allow mini grants for publishing. So this one, again, comes out of the conversations that we've had, mostly with the fall festivals. There are some pretty cool things going on. There's also a lot of data that we already have that we could publish on. And so the affinity group comparisons is an example of something that might be eligible for a mini grant based on publication. So taking advantage of the data we already have, but comparing comparing affinity groups or looking at one affinity group. Case studies that show impact. If you have something very cool going on for your specific festival that you think shows impact that would contribute to the gaps. And then partner survey results are something else that we haven't really focused on, but that a lot of us do. So those are just some random examples, again, of things that we know people are interested in. So let's take a couple minutes and answer any clarifying questions that people have for these. Taylor, you got anything?
Nope, nothing on. Oh, hold on. Now we got two more. Okay, first one is from Phyllis. Does publishing change what was promised to IRBs?
No. Well, no, Phyllis, you know. Your IRB may be different than ours. Publishing does not change the IRB that we have from UNC Chapel Hill. So we're all good there.
And Jordan said, is this to fund staff time mostly?
I think so. I think that if you needed to collect data from beginning to end and then publish it, that's probably a regular mini grant that includes publication as one of your deliverables. That's the model that we've seen a lot in the mini grants that have already been funded. But if the data are just sitting there and waiting to be taken advantage of, then you could apply for a mini grant to offset some of the cost of the time that would need to go in to pulling that manuscript together.
And Paula Frank said, would this take away from new learnings?
I don't think so, but I don't know. Paula, write more things. So we know more about what you're thinking. While she's doing that, we are at the top of the hour. We're almost done, but let's go ahead and initiate the last poll. If you guys could weigh in on this last topic before you sign off, if you do have to go straight at 2, that would be great.
Okay, we have 88% voted, 43% we need it, let's do it, 52% I can live with it, and 5% it's a mistake, please don't.
Okay. Okay. All right. So the last thing we wanted to ask, and it may make sense given the time, to have you guys put these in the chat too. If today's conversation has resulted in some sort of a light bulb moment for you, for bold steps that you think we should take that haven't been listed, please type those in the chat so that we have a record of those, and then we can follow up with you about those and think about whether that might be a better step for the community than anything that we've thought about and mentioned here. The other thing that I will say is that we are, is just a thank you for tuning in today and for being willing to sort of listen to all of this and think about what it makes sense to do and what it doesn't. The advisors that are going to be in the room in a couple of weeks are from lots of different areas of expertise, and they are all fantastic. And so I think having the sense from you guys about what you want to see and what you don't, where it makes sense to spend time and where it doesn't, is going to give us the chance to really leverage them and help them think about how we can use the last 2 years that we have together to our best advantage, both in the context of who we are as a community, but then in how festivals are positioned in the larger world of informal learning, which is where most of our advisors come from. So with that, thank you guys for tuning in. Again, if you have final thoughts, put them in the chat. If you want to take a second and share feedback about some of those graphics that I shared, I'm interested in what people think about those too. So if you want to type a quick note to us in the chat about whether it was helpful to see the vision, the possible vision for EvalFest that way, whether you'd like to see more of those kinds of slides in the future, that's helpful feedback for us to have too. Other than that, thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you for all of the feedback, and we will see you again next month.